Please excuse me, I'll be looking here. Hare Krishna, good morning devotees from Sri Mayapur. What is a Krishna poem? What? Can you hear what she's saying? She's speaking so slowly. Why don't you read this? Makaranda, Se Makaranda Panakori, Anande Bolo Hari Hari, Haringa Nami Manavela, Harikore Chakadola, Se Chakadolanka Paraye, Manamo Niranjare, Manamo Niranjare, Krishna, Holy Jiva Jam, Krishna, Holy Jiva, Motu Nara Rara Rara, Motu Nara Rara Rara, Motu Nara Rara Rara. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Today is the auspicious day of Ratha Yatra, and we're not going to say anything about Ratha Yatra today because we gave 2 classes in the last few weeks about Ratha Yatra. I think 3 actually. We won't be able, we'll just mention that Ratha Yatra, some years ago we were in Budapest for the Ratha Yatra festival, and they asked me to speak something to the crowd about the meaning of Ratha Yatra. And I looked out there, and right next to the Ratha Yatra cart, I'm serious too, there's a gambling casino right next to the Ratha Yatra cart. There's about maybe 20 devotees there, and a few hundred people who I really don't think were devotees because they had beers in their hands and hamburgers and smoking cigarettes, and some of them had their arms around girls who looked like kind of popular kind of girls. I don't know, maybe that's something to do with the gambling casino. And so I'm thinking, what am I going to say about Ratha Yatra? So we told them that this is a festival of rescuing God from mechanical religion and bringing him to the village of our hearts. And it celebrates that when the devotee cries for God, God cries for his devotee. That's Ratha Yatra. So we said that. That's Sri Jagannath Ratha Yatra. So the last few days we've been going really quick. We went through 3 chapters the last few days. Just kind of a summary. The first day we summarized chapters 26 and 27 together. And yesterday I basically summarized chapter 28 because I want to get on to chapter 29 because I don't know how much longer we're going to be doing this every day because it looks like we're going to be having to leave Mayapur in a week or 2. And I wanted to get to chapter 29. So we're starting with chapter 29 today, which is text number 1 and 2. And this is Devahuti speaking to her illustrious son, Lord Kapila Deva. Devahutir uvacha lakshanam mahadadinam prakrite purusasya cha sarupam lakshate misham yena tat paramartikam yata sankeshu katitam yanhulam tat prachakshate Bhakti Yoga Shame Margam Bruhi Vishtarasa Prabho. Devahuti inquired, please explain to me. She said, my dear Lord, you have very scientifically explained the symptoms of the total material nature and the characteristics of the spirit according to the Sankhya system of philosophy. That was our summary for the last few days. Now I shall request you to explain the path of devotional service, which is the ultimate end of all philosophical systems. Srila Prabhupada gives a little long purport. We're going to go ahead. Okay. He says, in this 29th chapter, the glories of devotional service are elaborately explained, and the influence of time on the conditioned soul is also described. The purpose of elaborately describing the influence of time is to detach the conditioned soul from his material activities, which are considered to be simply a waste of time. In the previous chapter, material nature, the spirit, and the Supreme Lord or Supersoul are analytically studied, and in this chapter, the principles of Bhakti Yoga or devotional service, the execution of activities in the eternal relationship between the living entities and the personality of Godhead are explained. Now, this is going to be our topic today. Prabhupada saying here in this one sentence. In this chapter, the principles of Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti, devotional service, the execution of activities in the eternal relationship between the living entities and the personality of Godhead, that's Bhakti, and Bhakta and Bhagavan. These are explained. Prabhupada goes on, Bhakti Yoga, devotional service, is a basic principle of all systems of philosophy. And that's a big topic. All philosophy which does not aim for devotional service of the Lord is considered merely mental speculation. But of course, Bhakti Yoga with no philosophical basis is more or less sentiment. There are two classes of men. Some consider themselves intellectually advanced and simply speculate and meditate. In America, they're members of the Democratic Party. And others are sentimental and have no philosophical basis for their propositions. Another party. Neither of these can achieve the highest goal of life, or if they do, it will take them many, many years. Vedic literature therefore suggests that there are three elements, namely the Supreme Lord, the living entity, and their eternal relationship. And that the goal of life is to follow the principles of bhakti, or devotional service, and ultimately attain to the planet of the Supreme Lord in full devotion and love as an eternal servitor of the Lord. Sankhya philosophy is the analytical study of all existence. One has to understand everything by examining its nature and characteristics. This is called acquirement of knowledge. But one should not simply acquire knowledge without reaching the goal of life or the basic principle for acquiring knowledge, Bhakti Yoga. If we give up Bhakti Yoga and simply busy ourselves in the analytical study of the nature of things as they are, then the result will be practically nil. It is stated in the Bhagavatam that such engagement is something like husking a paddy. There's no use beating the husk if the grain has already been removed. By the scientific study of material nature, the living entity, and the super soul, one has to understand the basic principle of devotional service to the Lord. Gora Graganya Ganagota Goloruharam Goram Gurutama Gopyada Kopa Vriksham Palagada Ratidan Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshikavadam Satatam Vanchakalpadurubhishcha Vipasindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare. So in the previous chapters, in chapter 25, Lord Kapila spoke about devotional service. And we gave elaborate classes. I think we gave almost 50 classes on that chapter. And then chapters 26, 27, and 28, he speaks about Sankhya, about Gyan, yoga, about the nature of the material world in connection with Bhakti. And now in this chapter 29, it's beginning with his mother asking him, Bhakti Yoga Shame Margam, that please tell me about the path, the marga of bhakti. And please do that, Bruhi, please explain that. Vistara sa Prabhu, my Prabhu, she's addressing her son as Prabhu. Interesting thing. Please do this, Vistara sa, in an elaborate way. You please explain this. So Srila Prabhupada in his purport more or less gives kind of a summary introduction to this chapter. And in the second paragraph, he gives a long sentence. I'll read again. Vedic literature therefore suggests that there are three elements, namely the Supreme Lord, the living entity, and their eternal relationship, and that the goal of life is to follow the principles of bhakti or devotional service and ultimately attain to the planet of the Supreme Lord in full devotion and love as an eternal servitor of the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada speaks about this in other places, and I'd like to explore that. In his purport to the 10th canto, chapter 3, text 31, Prabhupada speaks the same thing in a little different language. He says, Bhakti, Bhagavan, and Bhakta do not belong to the material world. Prabhupada says, this is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Mam Chayoga Vichari, no Bhakti Yogin Sevate Sadhunan, Samatityaitam Brahma Bhuyaya Kolpate. That one who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman. So this is Prabhupada's explanation of how Bhakti, Bhagavan, and Bhakti don't belong to the material world in a very brief way, because they transcend the modes of material nature. He's not saying it directly they descend from the spiritual world here, although he indicates that elsewhere. But he's saying here in a simple way that anyone who comes to the platform of Brahma Bhuta, that person has transcended the modes of material nature. In his purport, Srila Prabhupada says a very interesting thing, which in this, let's see how many sentences is this. So 1, 2, 3, 5 sentences. Basically, in these 5 sentences, he more or less summarizes this 29th chapter of the 3rd canto. And this is why I chose this today to read on this and contemplate on it. Prabhupada says, and this needs a lot of unpacking, he's going to say, please listen carefully. He says, Bhakti may be considered in 3 stages called Guni Bhuta, Pradhani Bhuta, and Kevala. And according to these stages, there are 3 divisions, which are called Gyan, Gyanamoyi, and Rati, or prema. That is simple knowledge, love mixed with knowledge, and pure love. By simple knowledge, one can perceive transcendental bliss without variety. This perception is called manabhuti. When one comes to the stage of Gyanamoyi, one realizes the transcendental opulence of the personality of Godhead. But when one reaches pure love, one realizes the transcendental form of the Lord as Lord Krishna or Lord Ram. This is what is wanted. So Prabhupada gives several technical terms here, which if we unpack them are the topics basically Lord Kapila speaks about in this chapter. Prabhupada gives some explanation. He says that of these 3 stages, Guna Bhuti, Pradhani Bhuta, and Kevala, there are 3 divisions called Jnana, Gyanamoyi, and Rati or prema. Simple knowledge, love mixed with knowledge, and pure love. So this is the topic of this chapter. What is pure bhakti? And what is bhakti mixed with different modes of material nature? What is bhakti mixed with different personal motivation? This purport of Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada is paraphrasing Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And I'd like to read a translation of Vishwanath's commentary, which unpacks a little bit what we were just hearing from Prabhupada, and also helps us to unpack this particular chapter. He says, Bhakti has 3 varieties. Guni Bhuta, meaning it's become secondary. Guna means secondary. Pradhani Bhuta, it has become primary. Bhakti has become primary. And Kevala, it's become exclusive. Of these, the results are sequentially Jnana, trance. So Guni Bhuta, when Bhakti is secondary, the result is Jnana. One goes into trance. It's pretty good. But when it's pradhani bhuta, it's become primary, then it becomes jnanamoyi rati, some rati or some affection for the Lord mixed with gyan. And the third, kevala, meaning prema. In that regard, it says by gyan, only the swarupa Brahman, which is exclusively composed of chit sukh, the bliss of sheer consciousness, is relished. And we spoke about this something yesterday, and how when the Lord is approached through the process of gyan, then what manifests before the practitioner is the Brahman effulgence. And when the practitioner is practicing Astanga Yoga, the object of Astanga Yoga is the Paramatma feature in the Lord, or Srishtikarta, that personality who creates the universe, as Lord is known as Lord Narayan. And we discussed from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Bhakti Tattva Vivek how he says that Bhakti Devi is not satisfied when someone is performing those processes, which Bhaktivinoda also says, as Prabhupada intimates in this verse today, when Prabhupada says that Lord Devahuti says, I request you to explain the path of devotional service, which is the ultimate end of all philosophical systems. In Prabhupada's purport, he says that bhakti or devotional service is a basic principle of all systems of philosophy. And so Bhaktivinoda explains that within these other processes such as jnana and such as yoga, there's also some element of bhakti. And without that element of bhakti, there would be no ruchi in their jnana, there would be no ruchi in their process of yoga, and they wouldn't be able to continue with it. In fact, he says even when someone practices bhakti, it's another big discussion, he says it's not enough that someone is surrendered. Sarvadharma Pritya is not enough. Saranagati is not enough. He says there also has to be some ruchi, some taste. Otherwise, and we've seen this over the years, we're sitting today with one of my oldest friends, Sachitanoy Prabhu, from the mountains, good life. And Sachitanoy Prabhu and I, we've both seen many, many devotees come. And they were surrendered, at least by some standard. The standard of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives in the 9th chapter of the Gita, when he explains the Apichet Sudharacha verse. Again, as we said something yesterday, that if someone is not taking shelter of jnana or karma or yoga, that means they're surrendered. They're just taking shelter of bhakti. We've seen devotees like that. They were surrendered by some definition, but they weren't able to stay because they didn't have ruchi. And if we have some ruchi, some taste in things, it's very nice. It should be, as we're saying, really a chamatkar, something astonishing. Then it'll never be given up. So, Prabhupada's saying here in his purport, this is Vishwanath on his purport in 10.331, the same purport we just read from Prabhupada. He says, if someone practices jnana, from that jnana moya rati, that affection, only Bhagavan Swarup, which is imbued with Chit Aishvarya Sukh, the joy of godly magnificence of sheer consciousness is relished. But by prema, only the Swarup of Krishna, Ram, and so on, which is imbued with sweetness, is relished. Now I'd like to go to the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, where Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains a little further. There's three or four verses we'll read, two of which they're spoken by Krishna, the Uddhavas, it's from the Uddhava Gita. In the first two, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, Krishna is explaining what is this pradhani bhuta bhakti, which Vishwanath just explained is, the pradhani bhuta bhakti means that it's become primary, bhakti's become primary. He says, Krishna says, Iti mam yasvadayamena bhajan nityam ananya bhak sarva bhuteshu madbhavo madbhaktam vindate tridam. One who worships me by his prescribed duty, having no other object of worship. This is the definition we gave just now about surrender. No other object of worship doesn't mean their heart is free from anarthas, but it means they have no other object of worship and remains conscious of me as present in all living entities. At least have some awareness, some idea. they achieve unflinching devotional service to me. Bhaktam vindate dridam. Dridam means very firm. And then he goes on in the next verse, Krishna says, Bhaktyo Davana Payanya. This is Anapayanya, unfailing. Unfailing bhakti, sarva loka maheshwaram, sarvopatyappyayam brahma karanam mukpayati sa. My dear Uddhava says, I'm the Supreme Lord of all worlds, and I create and destroy this universe, being its ultimate cause, and thus the absolute truth. And one who worships me with unfailing devotional service comes to me. So then in text 47, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he says this text speaks about what is gunabhuta bhakti. Vanashrama lavatam dharma esha chara lakshana saeva madbhati yukto nishreyasaya karapara. Those who are followers of this Vanashram system, they accept religious principles according to authorized traditions of proper conduct. When such Vanashram duties are dedicated to me in loving service, they award the supreme perfection of life. So this is, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur says, this is Gunabhuta Bhakti. Now, Gunabhuta Bhakti, again, is Bhakti which is secondary. And we spoke something more elaborately yesterday about this, about the practice of Vanashram Dharma and how it's three different people have three different attitudes toward that Vanashram Dharma. And one is they think that I must do this, otherwise I can't make advancement. The second personality thinks I don't have to do this, but I'll do it because it's beneficial for my bhakti. And the third is nirapeksha. They may do, they may not do. They're completely detached. So I wanted to speak about this today, and Satchitananda Prabhu, I think, knows why. Because in 1994, you were president in Atlanta, Georgia. You were there in Atlanta, Georgia in 1994 when Guru Maharaj was there. Guru Maharaj spoke for 3 or 4 days in this verse we just read from, the 31st verse of the 3rd chapter of the 10th canto. And he spoke actually just one sentence for 3 days. And I'll read a little something from him and make some comments. He says these 3 words, Bhakta, Bhakti, and Bhagavan, are derived from the verbal root bhaj. Bhaj means to serve. Bhakta means servant, servant of Krishna. Bhakti means servant to Krishna, and Bhagavan means sevya vastu, he whom is to be served. Therefore, Krishna Bhakti is the duty of a jiva, living entity, and Krishna Prem is the jiva's only prayojana, requirement or goal. Therefore, we say loving service. When you render service to Krishna, it should be loving service, not ordinary service. Priti mohi seva or prema mohi seva. Otherwise, Krishna won't accept it. You should accept that you are an eternal servant of Krishna. Your duty is to render service unto Krishna. And that service should be priti mohi. It should be loving service. Love is required. That is prayojana tattva prema. So in this chapter 29 of the 3rd canto of the Bhagavatam, we'll be hearing some about these 3 topics, Bhakta, Bhakti, and Bhagavan. Now Bhagavan is the object of devotion, and that devotion, the nature of that devotion is Bhakti, and how that Bhakti can be influenced by different modes of material nature, by different motivations, and accordingly there are different levels of bhaktas, or different levels of devotees. So I'd like to just jump around a little bit in this book, Mathura Meets Vrindavan, which is based upon this series of lectures our Guru Maharaj gave. He spoke about how bhakti is not the vritti. Vritti means the natural faculty or occupation. He said it's not the vritti, the natural occupation of the tatastha jiva shakti, the living entities who are in this material world, who are marginal living entities. And he said also it's not the vritti, the natural faculty, of the bahiranga maya shakti, the external material energy. Rather, bhakti is a vritti of Bhagavan's internal energy, the Sarup Shakti. It's a little technical, but it's a very important discussion. And here he's paraphrasing Jiva Goswami from Bhakti Sandarbha. And he says, because of this, because Bhakti is not the nature of the conditioned souls, it's not the nature of the external material energy, rather it's the nature of the internal energy. Because of this, Bhakti, Bhagavan, and Bhakta are not available here in the material world. Can't get it in the material world. Jiva Goswami has said in Bhakti Sandarbha, Anucheda 1, Paramatma Vaibhava Gananecha Tatashta Shakti Rupanam Chid Eka Rasanam Api. The Tatashta Jivas, the living entities who come to this material world, the living entities who are by nature marginal, they're Vaibhav emanations of Paramatma. This is what Jiva Goswami describes. Paramatma Vaibhava Gananecha Tatashta Shakti Rupanam Chid Eka Rasanam Api. The living entities here, they're emanations of Paramatma. And he says, since Bhakti is a vritti of the nature of the Sarup Shakti, it's not available to the Tatastha Jivas who are the Vaibhav emanations of Paramatma. It's very, very philosophical, very deep point, very deep point. Srila Prabhupada has described this in Bhagavad Gita. We mentioned this yesterday. It's in the 7th chapter, 641. Prabhupada says that the Paramatma manifestation is also a temporary, all-pervasive aspect of Kiradakashai Vishnu. It's not eternal in the spiritual world. Therefore, the factual absolute truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. He is a complete energetic person who possesses different, separated, and internal energies. And Guru Maharaj explains, he says, for these reasons it is said that Bhakti, Bhagavan, and Bhakta do not belong to the material world. Very, very philosophical discussion. We're going to continue a little bit of deep philosophy. Please bear with us. It's an important subject that we should understand. He says that the Tatastha Jivas who abuse their minute independence, they come to this material world. And this material world is a manifestation of the Maya Shakti, and therefore Bhakti has no place in the material world. Rather, Bhakti is a vritti of the Sarup Shakti. And he speaks about what another technical phrase, parinam. If you know something about Vedanta Sutra philosophy, there's a big discussion in different commentaries. What is parinam avad? It's part of the transformation. There's philosophy of transformation. And we reject Mayavad philosophy for this reason, because it has its parinam avad. That's another topic also. He says the parinam, transformation, and manifestation of the Tatastha Shakti is the Jiva Jagat, the realm of the Jivas. And this is spoken of also by Lord Kapila Dev in the previous chapter. We just touched on this a little bit yesterday. When the living entity wants to enjoy separate from the Lord, then this material universe is created for that person. And time, Lord Kapila Dev said, is the interaction between the Lord and this material nature. So he says that this is the parinam of the transformation of the Tatastha Jiva Shakti. It's this Jiva Jagat. The parinam of the Maya Shakti, the illusory energy, is a Jagat, the material world. Similarly, the parinam of the Antaranga Shakti, the transformation of the internal energy, is a spiritual world, Bhagavadam. In the spiritual world, Bhagavan has unlimited forms, unlimited leelas, and unlimited associates known as parikars. So Bhakti, being the vritti, the Antaranga Shakti, the internal energy of the Lord, is only available in the Chit Jagat, the spiritual world. It's not available here in this material world. So, how then do the living entities in this world get that Bhakti? It's described by Narottam Das Thakur, Golokera Premadan Harinama Sankirtan. This holy name descends, and that holy name descends from the spiritual world with the devotees of the Lord. And therefore it's described repeatedly in Shastra that Bhakti Stu Bhagavad Bhakti Sangena Parijayate, that Bhakti is the vritti, or the function of the Antaranga Shakti, the internal potency, who manifests in this world as a devotees. This is Guru Tattva. Either Guru is someone who's Sarup Shakti, Krishna Pushta Parikar, someone who's directly descended from the spiritual world, and we call them a Nitya Siddha, or they may be a Sadhana Siddha, they may be a Kripa Siddha, but they have some perfection. They may be a resident of this material world, but if they're carrying that message, Srila Prabhupada once commented that Nikunja Yuna Rati Keli Siddhai, which is from the Song of Narottam of Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, describing how Gurudev is engaged in the business of the gopis by bringing different people to Krishna. Prabhupada said that means book distribution. And this is the amazing thing. That means book distribution. That means preaching. And someone who, Prabhupada says in one purport in Madhya Lila, this is chapter 8, is someone who's engaged in that kind of preaching, they're a Nitya Siddha. They're already engaged in Gaura Lila right now. It's a very interesting topic. So this prema, this Krishna prema, this bhakti, is part of the Antaranga Shakti. It's not the vritti, it's not the function and nature of the Tatastha Jivas, it's not the nature of this Jada Jagat, the external material world. It's the parinam, or the transformation of the Antaranga Shakti, and it descends with Krishna's devotee. And this is how we get bhakti. Bhakti stu bhagavad bhakti sangena parijayate. And so these three things, bhakti, bhakta, and bhagavan, are not of this material world. So sometimes people become discouraged, and Guru Maharaj spoke about that quite a bit when he went to the West, because he saw that devotees don't feel so inspired. In his lecture, one of his lectures in Atlanta, he said, I'm just sure you were there. He said, it's not that such sadhus are not available here. And we become discouraged. Some people, they say, if you're a Prabhupada disciple, you're really doing good. And if you're not a Prabhupada disciple, you're just out of luck, because Krishna looked in his pocket and it's empty. And he doesn't have any other pure devotees. And Prabhupada was the last one, and this is tough. You can just cry. Right? But that doesn't make any sense. Guru Maharaj said in his lecture, it's not that such sadhus are not available here. Their hearts bleed seeing the suffering of the jivas here, so they descend. And he said there's two types of such sadhus: those who come by the direct order of the Lord, and those who come voluntarily, seeing the suffering of the jivas. And then he says a very interesting thing, which he used to comment on quite a bit. It is said that if there were no sun and moon, how would this material world go on? Similarly, if there are no sadhus, how can Krishna's world go on? Sadhus are always available. One cannot say, oh, sadhus are not available. I cannot see any sadhu. You have no vision to see a sadhu. Sadhus are there. Otherwise, how could Krishna's world go on? Similarly, if there were no sadhus, how could Krishna's world go on? Sadhus are always available. One cannot say, oh, sadhus are not available. I cannot see any sadhu. You have no vision to see a sadhu. Sadhus are there. Otherwise, how could Krishna's world go on? Sudha Bhaktas, pure devotees, are the bhushana, the ornaments of this world. Bhakti Devi is manifested in the heart of such Sudha Bhaktas, pure devotees. So I remember reading this from Guru Maharaj many years ago, or hearing this from Guru Maharaj many times, and it struck me deeply. And later, I'm looking for something right now. I came across a statement in the Padma Purana, reading through, which describes Sangsara Vaishnavadino, Deva Vaishnava Palita, Hamja Vaishnavadinas, Tasmat Shveshtascha Vaishnava. He says that this whole universe, as Guru Maharaj is saying, without the presence of a sadhu, he says, how can the sun and moon go on? So this exact thing is said by Krishna in the Padma Purana. Sangsara, meaning this material universe, Vaishnavadino, it's dependent upon the Vaishnavas. Deva Vaishnava Palita, the Devatas such as the moon, such as the sun, such as Vayu, the wind god, and Agni, the fire god, etc., they're all dependent, they're nourished by the Vaishnavas. They can't exist unless there's a pure Vaishnava present. And then Krishna says, Aham cha Vaishnavadinas. What to speak of everybody else? I can't exist. And as we often comment in this verse, that we say that Abhinatvanamani, Krishna is not different from his name. So this means also Krishna can't exist in his name. He can't be present in his name unless there's some pure Vaishnava present. So if there's a society of devotees who are enthusiastically chanting the holy name, there must be some pure devotee. It may be some sannyasi, it might even be a GBC, it might be a guru, it might be a housewife, it might be one of the children in the Gurukul. But there must be some pure devotee present. And therefore Krishna is speaking this verse in Padma Purana to Arjuna. He says, Tasmat Sheshtascha Vaishnava. Therefore, the Vaishnavas are the best of all. And what I was looking for is a beautiful quote from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, which was printed in one of his articles in Sajjana Toshini. He says, unless one develops faith, one can see neither a pure devotee nor the Supreme Lord, and will simply engage in three types of activities. If you don't have faith, you won't be able to see a pure devotee. You won't be able to see the Lord. And you're going to be cursed to simply engage in three types of activities. You may be a so-called devotee, but if you don't have faith, you can't see a pure devotee, you can't see the Lord, and you're going to engage in these three activities of envy, violence, or blasphemy. That's what you're going to be stuck with. Because you don't have any inspiration. You don't see that there's a pure devotee present. You don't really have faith in the Supreme Lord. We call this the philosophy of Hiranyakashipu. When Prahlad was being chastised by his father, Hiranyakashipu asked him, where is your God, Prahlad? And Prahlad said, Father, he's everywhere. And Hiranyakashipu became angry. And he said, is he in this pillar? And Prahlad said, yes, Father, he's also in the pillar. And then Hiranyakashipu took a sword out and said, then I'll kill him. And we know he got a big surprise, that actually God was in the pillar and God is everywhere. So Hiranyakashipu, his philosophy, he doesn't believe that God is everywhere. And people who have the philosophy of Hiranyakashipu, they don't believe that there's always pure devotees present. They think that I have a pure devotee as a guru and you're just out of luck. It's too bad for you. And that's a kind of atheism. Because if Krishna is present, then there must be pure devotees present. We should have strong faith in that. If this universe is existing, it means somewhere there must be some pure devotee. And by the presence of that devotee, that Bhakta, the Tatastha Jivas, the Buddha Jivas in this material world, they can get Bhakti. And they can see Bhagavan. So these three things, Bhakta, Bhakti, and Bhagavan, they're not of this material world. And the living entities here, it's required for them, Bhakti stu Bhagavad Bhakti Sangena Parijayate. If they want to get this Bhakti, they have to come in contact with that pure devotee. So I'm going to stop there. We're a little late compared to what I usually stop. Very philosophical discussion today. I hope nobody died. Donna Kelly, how are you? Do you know Donna Kelly? You've met her maybe. Okay. Donna Kelly sometimes comes to Los Angeles. She lives in Arizona, I think, Donna Kelly, is that right? She's watching you there right now. She's about your age. She's about our age, a very sweet lady. Hare Krishna, Lynn, nice to see you. I'm always astonished that Lynn can appreciate anything we're speaking, all this philosophy. Lynn's a very philosophical person. And there's someone named Sasha who's present also. Oh my God. Mitra Vindas asked, please speak about what bhakti is. There are so many ways it's presented in regarding to getting things done versus enhancing the spiritual growth of the seekers, quite often, usually ending in bewilderment. Well, I'm not going to speak about that right now because that's the subject of this chapter of the Bhagavatam. And we'll speak more about that as we go along. She has another question. Isn't it that instead of Krishna accepting it, it's Srimati Radharani who accepts because everything goes through her? Yes. And therefore we say that Srimati Radharani is Bhakti Devi. And it's described in many different places that Krishna himself says, what is the verse? It's not coming to my mind. It says that if someone wants to get me, they have to go through Srimati Radharani, otherwise they can't attain me. And Madhupatipu has a question: will sadhus be available after Lord Chaitanya's millennium is over in Kali Yuga? As long as this material universe is present, there have to be sadhus present. That's the purpose of this material universe. There'll definitely be some. They may not be so many, they may not be so prominent, they may not have the same level of realization and advancement, but they're always present. Okay. And Natalia, Hare Krishna. Mama Kapil, Hare Krishna. Donna Kelly, Hare Krishna. Nice to see you. And Lynn, thank you for your encouragement. Donna Kelly, she says, I am. Okay. I am what? My voice is an echo, okay? Okay. So, anybody here have any reflections or comments or anything? Can you speak in the mic? Sorry. Take it.
Yes, when you were mentioning, Prabhu, about the sadhus, I do remember one time when Srila Govinda Maharaj was giving class, and one particular person who was very much into Ritik philosophy, he came from the purpose of just challenge.
I think I was there that day.
Probably. And he says, is there any gurus? He raises his hand, is there any saintly persons here now? It's like, saying like an ISKCON and Gurudev with the same, answer that you were giving before in other places. He said, Are Baba, is the sun is there, the moon is there. He says, without the sun and the moon, this universe wouldn't go on. So then I thought, okay, this is it. It's a perfect answer. Unfortunately, this person, because he's so stubborn in his philosophy, still keep preaching really strong that philosophy. It's unfortunate, as you were saying before, the Hiranyakashipu philosophy. That you just don't get it. It's so rooted in your heart, some kind of envy or a misunderstanding or bad karma. I wish well to that person. I'm a well-wisher. And I even one time challenged him. I said, Prabhu, the whole philosophy of our Krishna consciousness is to follow sadhus. So you become a sadhu, I follow you. Because even Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Puranas, without the saintly persons, I don't derive any pleasure. And I see in Gurudev's book, that quote is there. Without the saintly persons, I do not derive any pleasure. That's Krishna himself speaking. So that's a really true, without saintly persons. Anywhere, any place, any society, in any religious group, we want a sadhu. So that was the comment. And the question is a little bit different, but go on.
Thank you. Sometimes we have kind of what I would consider to be a religious understanding of what is a Vaishnava. A Vaishnava is someone who has tilak on and kunti mala, but the FBI during the Vietnam War, they infiltrated the Hawaii temple, they sent a spy there, and he was wearing tilak, he was living in the temple for some time, kunti mala, but we don't consider him to be a devotee. There's many examples like that, spies in different places, and people in LA every Halloween, and people come and they dress up like devotees as a kind of a joke. We should understand deeply what it means to be Vaishnava. One definition is Krishniti Yashigiri Tvamavasavayeta, that anybody who's chanting Krishna's name, I give respect to them because they're chanting. But Dikshasti Chetvanati Vishchavajantamisha, Goswami says if someone's initiated, I give more respect to them. And Nindadi Shuna Hidamitsika Sambalabhya, that person whose Nindadi Shuna Hidam, his heart, is free from the propensity to criticize him. That's Sambalabhya. That's who I want to associate with. And so it's a shame that there are people who are practicing bhakti, but by some definitions they're demons. By Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's definition, by what Kapila is going to say in this chapter, what Prabhupada says, Chaitanya Charitamrita says in one place, there are many envious persons in this Krishna conscious movement, and one should practice upeksha, neglect of them. Otherwise we can't progress. But at the same time, we give respect. I'm also a demon who is externally practicing bhakti. We should respect anyone who's doing, but we should associate with people who don't criticize. That's our book. You have something else?
Just, yeah, a different question. This is, we heard many times, and even Prabhupada mentioned this, of course, that in the material world, speaking about bhakti or love, the closest one that we can see is the relationship between the mother and the son, the child. But there's a things, love, if we can find it. So I was considering this, that in our literatures, in our Vedic literatures, most of the time we see that the mothers of the mother of Krishna, the mother of Lord Chaitanya, and Lord Ramachandra's mother, we don't see that how do you say, that they approach the Lord in the mood of God. And I was surprised, well, not surprised, but I'm just wondering, Mother Devahuti sees his son as, oh my Lord, oh my Prabhu. And it looks like there's something there that you want to comment in that, or the acharyas haven't said something about it?
Our acharyas speak about that quite a bit. Just like there's a difference between, Prabhupada writes in the same purport we were just reading from, there's a difference between the love of Vasudeva and Devaki and Yashoda and Nanda. And we hear in the Bhagavatam that when Krishna killed Kamsa, and then when he went and rescued Vasudeva and Devaki, they began offering prayers to him. And one of the things they said, actually, you're not our son. You're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna kind of made a face. This is not very nice. And he bewildered them to forget all about that so that he could sit on their lap. But a similar thing is also described in when Uddhava came to Vrindavan. Uddhava went to Nanda and Yashoda, and he said the same thing to them. He said, actually, Krishna's not your son. He's a Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when he told this to Nanda Maharaj and Mother Yashoda, they just looked at him. They said, what, are you crazy? We know what Bhagavan is. Bhagavan is Satya Sankalpa. Whatever he says is true. But our Krishna, he's a Mityachara. He tells lies. He's a chore. He's a thief. Bhagavan is the cause of all causes. But our Krishna, he carries my shoes on his head. and he cries when he can't get his mother's breast milk. How is he Bhagavan? So they don't, that sweetness, in their case, overwhelms the Aishvarya. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments that just like you see in the villages, to this day I often see when some wala, milkman is bringing milk from their cows, from the Goshala, they keep the milk, they're bringing on a bicycle or a motorcycle, and they keep the milk, they have these big open containers, and they put straw on top so the milk doesn't come out. Now when you get that milk, there's sometimes little pieces of straw in it. And when you get that milk, the first thing you do in India, you boil it. And so when you're boiling it, sometimes that straw comes to the top. Sometimes it goes down to the bottom. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. And that's the example that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives of the Brijbasis, Nanda and Yashoda, that sometimes the conception that Krishna's Bhagavan comes to the top. And they think, oh, the cowherd boys, sometimes they go at the end of the day to see Mother Yashoda and say, it was amazing. Krishna killed this demon, and when we were coming home, there was some guy, he was naked, he had ashes all over his body, he was in the air riding on a bull, and there was another guy, he was on an elephant, and this guy had eyes all over his body, and there was another guy riding on a swan who had 4 heads, it's really far out. And they were all showering flowers on Krishna and calling him Bhagavan. And when she hears it, Mother Yashoda says, really? My Gopal, Bhagavan, isn't that sweet? Huh? Her love doesn't become diminished. Whereas Chaitanya Charitamrita says that Aishvarya Priti Sankuchita, the nature of Aishvarya, opulence, knowledge is, it weakens the love. And so it's a whole other topic, which would be very sweet to go into in this particular verse. I'm not going there now, perhaps later in this chapter. But we see that Mother Devahuti, she's addressing her son as Prabhu. Even amongst devotee mothers in our society, I've never seen a mother call her son Prabhu. Maybe sometimes out of respect when my son's been initiated or something. But that phrase Prabhu, which means master, it has some kind of opulent connotation to it, it has some kind of opulent conception. So Leela Avatar Mataji said, sometimes we hear the devotees that we really like get critical of others. It's very hard to understand. That's why Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, when someone would start criticizing, this is why God created wristwatches. I don't know if they had a wristwatch 500 years ago, I kind of doubt it, but the same principle is there, that when someone would start coming and criticizing someone, he would look at his wristwatch and say, oh, you know, I am really sorry, I have to go somewhere, please excuse me, and would just run away. And this is not just a social principle that we want to be good little mushrooms and follow, eat the stool or whatever, and stay in the dark of the leaders and be good little chelas and be obedient. It's not just a principle of ignorance like that we want to continue the society, but this is a principle of bhakti. I'm not just practicing this principle of avoiding criticism because I want the society to go the next step. I'm avoiding it because I want Krishna bhakti. And hearing that criticism is very detrimental to me. So I hope that's some help. Mr. Vinda said, please address the difference between the last leg of Dharma, speaking truthfully of spiritual intelligence, and with regard to protecting devotees and criticism. So devotees have to speak the truth, but at the same time, they don't do it in an envious kind of way. And also, we speak the truth according to our position. If someone's a brand new Bhakta, and they hear some criticism of some GBC member, some sannyasi, to read something on the internet, it's not appropriate for them to start speaking about that in Bhagavatam class. They've only been a devotee for 2 or 3 days. They don't know that person. That devotee's been practicing bhakti for decades. And they may have some problems, they may have some mistake they've done. But we should see the good qualities in them and overlook that bad thing. So this is the last leg of Dharma. We want to speak truthfully, but we also have to understand according to our position. It's a mad person, a crazy person who speaks not understanding his position. And they're living in some fantasy that they think, now I'm a very advanced devotee, I can challenge the Swami, I can challenge all the senior devotees. That's madness. A Vaishnava is someone who's a Manina Manadena, who doesn't have any pride for himself and gives all respect to others. And by that, Kirtaniya Siddhahari, they can chant always. So I hope that's some help. It's a big topic. I don't want to go further. Does anybody else have any reflections on it? Pioneer, I always have something. I know it's late. You can be quick.
Okay. Thank you so much for this comment that if we don't have faith that there are pure devotees in this world, so we're going to be involved in violence, what else?
Enviousness? Or blasphemous activities.
Yeah. So, and we don't want. And another thing that you said, almost in the beginning of the class, that Sharanagati is not enough. And I listened from my Guru Maharaj, just the door, it's just before the door, the place before the door. And the taste is important, it required. And also it reminded me about this famous Srila Prabhupada lectures from Vrindavan on Nectar of Devotion. So the preacher is the person who gives the taste.
Very good. So this statement of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, which you're paraphrasing, that if someone doesn't see a pure devotee, they don't have faith, they won't see the devotee, and they'll simply engage in envious, violent, or blasphemous activities. Some of them may ask the question, how can I have faith in devotees? Especially because I've heard so many bad things about all the devotees, and there's been so many devotees fall down. How can I have faith in them? Well, there's a simple answer to that. If you're simple, and if you develop faith in the process of bhakti, if you hear about the glories of chanting Hare Krishna, how amazing it is that someone just chants Krishna's name even once, how exalted that person is, then you can easily, because you have that faith in bhakti, then you can see and you can appreciate something about devotees. But Deho Nata Jata Jata, Bhakti says, still, we should give respect according to their position. You had something else?
It's just something small. It's also this statement of the connection that taste is required, not just Sharanagati. It's reminding what Krishna Kunt was reading a few days ago from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, that prayers, in the process of bhakti, prayers and shreyas, they're merged. So, and it means that taste is always here.
Yeah, such an important thing. Bhakti Vinod explains this, that as we were saying earlier, that this ruchi has to be there. And without that ruchi, you can't get success even And karma, again, that ruchi comes from bhakti. How is that? Shushu Shoshradasha Vasudeva Kataruchi Sham Mahat Sevaya Vipa Punititam Sevam. It comes when we serve the Vaishnavas, when we serve Gurudev, and we hear from them, we get some Kataruchi. So we're going to go ahead and stop there. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and we're not going to be here. Hare Krishna, Madhupati Prabhu, I'm sorry, he says our microphone is not connected to the computer. I don't know. I'm going to do some more tests with it. Maybe I have to buy another microphone. This is a second microphone we've gone through. I'm thinking to try to get a really nice one or something. Anyway, thank you all very much. We'll be back again on Thursday as well. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai, Shiva Prabhupada Ki Jai, Vansha Kalpa Guru Vischa, Kripa Sindhu Guru Vicha, Patita Anand